discussing 99 pages of a book every week to improve our worldview, our personal practice, our public discourse, etc. This month, the fine Educator Book Club, look at these fine individuals. We are reading Onward by Elena Aguilar. Panelists, if you have it near you, you can throw it up in the air, show it. Never too late, everybody, to get it from your library. This is an incredible book about social emotional coaching, which really means all things like how do we take care of ourselves? How do we prevent teacher burnout? How do we see the best in others and in ourselves? This week, we are reading chapters 5 through 8. So we're going to talk about all of them. I also just want to quickly shout out what we're going to read next month. It is called Tattoos on the Heart. It is by Father Gregory Boyle, a Jesuit priest who grew up in LA and founded the largest gang rehabilitation and reentry program in the world. It's called Homeboy Industries. I thought just given the holiday season in December, it'd be a nice, inspiring story. And I'm going to read a little quote from it, from the preface. All right. He says, if there's a fundamental challenge within these stories, it is simply to change our lurking suspicion that some lives matter less than other lives. I know a lot of us who come to the education space do it because we value lives, in particular marginalized lives. I'm also just going to keep reading. Though this book does not concern itself with solving the gang problem, it does aspire to broaden the parameters of our kinship. It hopes not only to put a human face on the gang member, but to recognize our own wounds in the broken lives and daunting struggles of the men and women in these stories. Our common human hospitality longs to find room for those who are left out. So if that inspires you at all, it's an incredible collection and a best-selling book called Tattoos on the Heart. Get it from your library. Lastly, it's Veterans Day. So I just want to thank everybody who has served. My grandfather was a bombardier in World War II, helped create a freer world. And I am just grateful to those who put their lives on the line to protect our country and serve abroad. So thank you for that. But let's pass off to this incredible panel. Enough of me boring. This is the 99 Pages Educator Book Club. We'll start top left with Zachariah. If you just want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. This is Zachariah coming to you from Baltimore, Maryland. I feel like with my 5th time introducing myself, it ought to be short and sweet. So with that said, I'll pass it on.
Boom. There he goes, Mr. Efficient. We have a new panelist to introduce to the world. She is my hero, my graduate professor, Dr. Anika Burton.
Good evening, everyone. I am honored to be a part of this discussion. So good to see Jackie and Kendra, who I taught back at Hopkins. I have been in education since 1995. I actually signed my first teaching contract on the day of the first Million Man March. So it has been quite a journey, and I am honored to be here with you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burton. Next up, we have Laurel Staub, veteran 2-time panelist in all the Educator Book Clubs. Thank you, and Director of Innovative Learning and Pedagogy at the African Leadership University. Let me spotlight, boom.
Thank you, Jackie. And so good to be back with you all this evening. Just a quick introduction. Like Zachariah said, it should be short and sweet. So glad to be back again and excited to get into this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Blueprint Literacy Coach, former high school English teacher, my friend from Teach for America, Baltimore, Kendra Gray.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Jackie. Short and sweet, Kendra Gray, Blueprint Literacy Coach. Same thing Jackie said. I'm really excited to be a part of this today.
People are like, boom, boom, boom. It's Wednesday. Let's get to the point. We have next my mentor, a leader who I first met running Baltimore's College and Career Readiness Program, now a partner at 4 Point Education Partners. Rudy Seymour, introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jackie. So glad to be back this week for the second week to be discussing this timely topic. This is my 20th year serving public education, 8 of those as a classroom teacher at the high school level, and really glad to be part of this great panel. And knowing that we've got so many challenges going on right now in education, but we know our teachers and educators are working so hard, and glad to give them a chance for their concerns to be discussed this evening.
We got to create space. This is the tough stuff. These are the most important things. So let's just dive right in. Last week, we ended on chapter 4, which was all about building community. It was a little rushed, though. So I'm curious if someone wants to just start us off by sharing a little bit more on how to build trust within the communities that we serve.
Thanks, Jackie. Since it's the 99 pages discussion, I'm going to pick up right away with page 100. The nice quote that I thought did a good job of acknowledging the fact that we can't put all of these challenges on the backs of teachers. And so the author Aguilar says, leaders, if you want to stop the exodus of teachers from your school, create a nourishing, healthy community. And she points out that student learning is impacted by the amount of relational trust among the adults. And so how do we foster that? The implications for leaders from that chapter are that leaders are responsible for shaping the culture of their school or organization. So I thought that did a great job of setting the stage organizationally around ways that leaders need to be helpful to teachers in this work.
Amazing. Anything anybody else want to add about organizations that they've been in that fostered more community or less, more trust or less?
I'd just like to name, to Rudy's point from page 100, that especially new teachers or people who are new to your school community, I think about people who might transfer from different schools to your school site. They literally pick up those habits that Aguilar talks about how do you demonstrate that you disagree with another colleague as a school leader? How do you, what do you do when you get upset parents? People watch that and then it kind of gets etched in their brain of how they should operate when those situations arise. I'm thinking of a situation that's like really fresh in my mind with the teacher I have who basically pinpointed every action step that she saw someone in leadership do at her school site and tried to emulate that in her approach, and it went horribly. So I think it is just really important to continue to highlight that if you want to set your school community up to be strong and healthy, and the word nourish, I love the word nourishing, you do have to really model and demonstrate how to handle these specific situations so that others who are watching can do the same.
I couldn't agree more. Let's move on to chapter 5. This one was all about mindfulness. It was called Be Here Now. It also touches upon many other issues related to mindfulness, such as how mindfulness can help us uncover implicit bias, how it can help us find micro moments of joy, as a term that I liked, and how it can help us cultivate more humor in our work. If we can't laugh at some of these situations, I don't know how to get out of bed some days. A specific quote. So on page 139, Elena Aguilar reminds us, a challenge for you in doing this work is that you need to do some of your own work first. I'm curious, as it relates to mindfulness, implicit bias, any of these things, do any of you practice this, mindfulness or otherwise, and how has it benefited your work? Zachary, I'm just going to go ahead and start with you.
Sure. Yeah, this is a section that really spoke to me. I think I've come around to mindfulness in the past few years. I was a little bit weary when it first made its way into the school that I taught at about 6 or 7 years ago. But I just didn't have familiarity with the concept. I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know how it could be applied to my students' lives, to my own life. And I've warmed up to it over the years. I know I may be a little bit later than some people on that, but this struck me as relevant and personal for me right now because about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I went and saw my brother, who's an acupuncturist, and I've been seeing him for years for a variety of things, and sometimes it's just touch up and maintenance. But he said, "How are you feeling today?" And I said, "Honestly, I've been," and again, this was about 2 weeks prior to the election. I said, "I'm feeling really worried and really anxious, and I feel like I've been feeling that every day for a long time." So I just laid this down at his feet, and I basically said, "What can you do?" And he said, "Well, we might be able to do some stuff, but here's what I want you to do in between this session and the next time you come see me." And he instructed me to practice mindfulness or meditation by another name. And so what I've been doing now every day for the past 3 weeks is after a certain exercise, it can be a run, it can be a walk, it can be light yoga, it can be light resistance bands, something just to get my blood flowing. After doing that, I sit down for 5 to 10 minutes. It doesn't need to be more than 10 minutes. And I simply sit with my thoughts. And I notice what's there. And I found that after 2 or 3 days, I actually became much better at it. And there were 2 big takeaways from that experience. The first is that I have a very scattered brain, right? I think what is usually an asset for me professionally and personally, having a really active mind, like when I am alone, and right now I'm not working, I don't have colleagues, I don't see a ton of people during the day. Like when I'm alone, my thoughts can start to beat up on me. And so when I was sitting there in that moment and realized that my mind is really active and wants to go this way and that way, to typically self-critical thoughts, things that I should be doing, things that I could be doing better, I learned really quickly that I can actually rein those thoughts back in. And now a few weeks later, I'm still noticing that my mind wanders, but I'm noticing that I'm not giving those self-critical thoughts as much life as they otherwise would have. I might notice it, recognize it, and then just rein it back in. And maybe something else will pop up and then I'll rein that back in. So that was the first realization, that I'm able to, that I do have an active mind and I need to rein those thoughts back in, but there's an effectiveness toward the recognition and sort of bringing back to center. The other thing, and Elena Aguilar points to this in that section, the other thing is I came to a place one day when I was sitting down and recognizing my thoughts, and I almost took a third person perspective on my thoughts. And I thought, wait, I just had a breakthrough. I am not an anxious person, but I have anxious thoughts. And that to me was a really important distinction. So she touches on it, page 128. It's really, I'm sorry, 128. She says, this is the beginning of the first full paragraph. We think we are our thoughts. Mindfulness teaches us to notice that our thoughts have their own existence. And so for me, for someone who has dealt with some level of anxiety for some years, just being able to come to this conclusion where I recognize, all right, I'm going to have these thoughts. I do have an active mind, but when my mind produces that is not necessarily who I am. That can be something that sort of lies adjacent to who I am, but it's something that I can, anxious thoughts are something that I can point to, I can put on the table, I can examine, I can look at from multiple perspectives. And so for me, what started as maybe a 2-week trial, which was all my brother was really asking me to do, for me, I think this just needs to be a part of my daily practice, because I'm already seeing so many benefits, and I feel like I'm also only starting to scratch the surface of it. So very recent, very timely, very personal, but I'm very excited about the beginning of that mindfulness or meditation practice.
I am just nodding this whole time. I am not an anxious person. I have anxious thoughts. Basically, every negative emotion I feel every day, a million times a day, it's like, I am not a frustrated person. I'm just feeling frustrated in this moment. I think it's one thing to do for yourself. I think it's even harder to do for others. Like, that person isn't selfish. They are just, that one behavior was selfish. That's like another thing as I try to break and separate the person from the action, as well as my identity from my thoughts and my feelings, which are transient. Anybody else want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about page 128 as well, because when you get down to that next section, she starts it out and it's called Sit Down and Focus on Your Breath. And just the sit down part, I think, is sort of revolutionary, because we are constantly go, go, go. And I have found, because I will admit, like, I hate buzzwords. I hate the latest jargon, so I get mindfulness and I do appreciate it and I think it's important, but sometimes people just throw these words out and then the meaning behind it gets lost. And so I have found, especially since we've been kind of like in quarantine and having to reshape our lives, I have come to appreciate slowing down, and just pulling all the way back and giving myself space to process my thoughts, to deliberately move slower. I've taught my kids, like, before you say anything, I literally taught them, like, count to 5 and think about what you're about to say. And I found myself giving myself that same self-talk, like, stop, just stop, because right now everything does feel very heightened. And I think people are wearing their emotions like right at the surface. And if we can just slow down and convince ourselves that, you know what, the world actually will not end if I take a minute, whatever it is I have to do. So, if my kid is calling me, I don't have to like run and trip up the steps to go handle that like right now. If, somebody's sending me an email, I don't have to do that like right now. And so that, I think, just also helps to center us if we can sort of reclaim our time and honor ourselves. And so before you, focus on your breath, just the whole sit down, just stop, and that's kind of what I've been doing lately. I get up every morning at 5:30 to study and to pray. But part of that is just stop, just stop the world, and giving yourself permission to do that even throughout the day. I think is crucial. And because when you slow down, you can actually think. And I think we say things inadvertently, we take on emotions inadvertently when we don't just slow down. So, I found all of this very helpful, and it reminded me to just, it's okay. And I can actually stop, and tomorrow will come and the sun will shine, and, there will be puppies and rainbows, and it will be okay because we convince ourselves of the doom and gloom. So I think slowing down also just gives us a moment to get perspective, and that makes everything better, I think. Yeah.
I'm curious, does anybody have a way in their calendar, in their teaching, that actually reminds them to slow down? Anybody like have a way to make it, Kendra, share.
Yeah, like I have so many thoughts. So the one strategy that I use is just blocking off time in my calendar that has a private label on it. And even if that time doesn't, like, it will literally be like just so I can walk around and not have to be on my laptop. And even if I don't necessarily utilize that block of time as I intended initially when I put the block there, it's there, right? Like that's time that I know that no one else can put a meeting over or demand something for me so that I can slow down. And then I was reminded of the quote, sometimes you have to slow down to go fast. And a lot of times, if we consistently go fast, we won't ever be able to be like efficient and effective in that. And so slowing down helps, the efficiency of going fast and like making sure that when we go fast, it's accurate, it looks great, and not like we're filing out. And then my last example, I just was thinking about the student, and I was coaching a teacher who was a kindergarten teacher at Southwest Baltimore Charter. And one day I went into her observation, and I was there a bit early, and all the lights were out. All the students were sitting at their desk, and she had these wonderful like light show globes in her room, and she was playing really calm music. And I just want to continue to uplift the fact that like the book, although we're talking about strategies for adults, like a lot of these strategies also can be rolled down to our students in our classrooms. And she made it known to me that they start every, I guess it was the second per lesson. She said she started every transition that way so that students could feel a part of the learning and that they could calm down and slow down. And so I just wanted to highlight that, Ms. B, at Southwest Baltimore Charter, it was beautiful to see, and it's something that can be replicated and can be done for our little ones as well.
I love it. Any other reactions, Zachariah?
I'll throw one more in there quickly. I'll do it without the soapbox stuff. I've got lots of thoughts on technology. I simply give myself one screen-free day per month.
Wow.
So off my phone, off my computer, off TV and Netflix. And it came from a place of desperation, some time ago, but I realized like I am too wired. There are too many stimuli, and I just need to take a break. And so now what I do is I'll identify the day in advance. I'll let my family know, like I'll just say screen-free day. They know what that means now. If I want to get together with people, I will arrange that in advance, and I will just go and meet them at the spot. that I said I would. You know how we used to do. And I just, I'll read, I'll go for walks or exercise, I'll cook. I have a record player, and I'll usually get bored around 9 o'clock. And that's a really, really good feeling when I'm present. So that's my.
I don't think we allow kids to be bored anymore because we always have this babysitter in front of us. Well, great. Well, I think we should move on to chapter 6. It's about take care of yourself. So it's all about self-care. Anika mentioned jargon. I worry sometimes that self-care also can be a little eye-rolly. In fact, my favorite mentor, Rudy, sent me this great Facebook snapshot of a tweet, and it says, "We can't have unrealistic expectations for educators and then gaslight them by saying they need to practice self-care. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk." So do want to point out that self-care is not the only Band-Aid to the systemic issues in education, but she did, Elena Aguilar wanted self-care to be November's theme. And she said, self-care is the root of resilience when you're dragging yourself towards winter break and your emotions are raw. I'm curious for anyone on this panel, how do you all think about self-care at an individual or an organizational level? Laurel, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I really wish in reading this book that I had it when I started teaching as, when I was 21 years old, teaching middle school, because there's so much wisdom in here that was also not in the training that I received and not in the kind of culture and mindset for how I was trained. I was also, I think, as a lot of us are in this group, Teach for America. And but I was doing it in 2004. I hope that they've changed this. But at the time, the culture was very much, when I read the part about the martyrdom, it seemed like they were training us to try to be martyrs, honestly. So, we weren't supposed to get sick. And if we did get sick, we would work through it, push through it. We were just kind of there for 2 years to give our all. And so it's so refreshing to be able to read this now and be like, yeah, that was messed up as a mindset. And that's not what we should be doing. But this kind of taking care of yourself very much reminded me of Bell Hooks, who Elena Aguilar, I think, includes several quotes from. She's one of my favorite authors on a lot of things, but including education. And she talks about, in one of her books, this concept of engaged pedagogy. And in order to get students engaged, because they are kind of thirsty for learning that is healing, teachers end up actually being healers, right? So it's one of the many roles that we play as educators, is to actually heal our students. And in order to do that, we have to first be whole ourselves. And so it becomes so important to be able to allow yourself to be sick. If you get sick, know that that's your body needing to take a break, and allow that time for that, because the body really does hold so much. And so there's just, a lot of great tips in this that are obviously kind of things that we know that we should be doing, but she really pushes and emphasizes how important sleep is, how important it is to eat well, and that this is actually, we're doing this for ourselves and for our students, right? If we don't do this, we won't be able to be the whole people that we need to be, so that we can actually give them the type of education that they are craving and need as well. So we're doing it for ourselves, but we're also doing it for them, and we're doing it as models for them. So it is, I think, such an important part of the type of teacher that I want to be, and the type of teacher that we want to allow all educators to be.
I love that you used this word wholeness, because I feel like the whole child and the whole student has become a strategic initiative. It's part of Baltimore's strategic initiative. It's the state of Tennessee, Gates Foundation, their education team. It's one of their strategies. But I think it's important to note that it's really hard to support the needs of the whole child if you don't support the well-being of the whole teacher. So I'm really glad, Laurel, that you mentioned that term. Anybody else want to talk about self-care at an individual or organizational level?
I have something that I'd like to add. I think it speaks to more of the organizational level and also individual too. But in order for teachers to be able to take care of themselves, there does have to be some hard lines in the sand in terms of when it's appropriate, and also like making the space for people to like go to the doctors, for example, or like go have some supervise some work that needs to get done on their house that they've been putting off for months or whatever. I think that like it helps if you have a school leadership team that encourages and demonstrates that to others, that they do that. Like I'm taking the rest of the day off because I have a doctor's appointment that I have to go to, and kind of make that known, as comfortable as possible, so that teachers know that it's okay. One of the pieces of self-care that I like share for my teaching group a lot is like, self-care isn't just like trips to the spa, although they're great. I have one scheduled, but also like, when was the last time you scheduled a dentist appointment and you went to the dentist appointment? When was the last time, you had a physical, so that you can make sure your like physical being is being taken care of beyond this like coin phrase of self-care. So like using your benefits that you pay for monthly and actually like making sure you are getting your bang for the buck, so to speak. Like that is also a measure of self-care. It's not always the like, I'm going to go to happy hour. Sometimes it is like going and, having a therapy session that you pay for. It comes out of your paycheck monthly. So use those pieces as well to kind of support the whole being, and not just these like once over feelings, which I like the manicures too. I like brunch and I like, the spa, but I also like go to therapy biweekly, or, go to the dentist to make sure my dental hygiene is strong. So those pieces also are a big part of self-care.
Kendra, you mentioned this needs to be modeled at the top at like a leadership level. They need to demonstrate this. Rudy, you've worked in some pretty intense work environments, Baltimore City central office, I'm sure Milwaukee. I'm curious if you've seen any best practices modeled at the top from the superintendent or at the school level of self-care being modeled. I'm just curious.
I think one that has been helpful for me and folks I've worked with, I learned from Linda Treadway, who has done a lot of teacher and principal development over the years, both on the West Coast and then in DC as well. Has to do with being able to acknowledge each other's humanity and doing that in a very direct and tangible way. So even at the top of each, meeting, before rushing into the agenda and, going through all the different accountability points, taking that pause to ask folks, what's new and good in their life, and give them a chance to, have their humanity acknowledged. And I think that connects with what we've been discussing around that, that hitting that pause button and kind of being mindful and just realizing that, there are other things that are going on in folks' lives, and that also can help, put people in a better mindset. And I think that's been helpful. And even, folks I hadn't worked with in a few years that I've reconnected with recently have brought up that practice as something that they have continued to do, that it's been helpful for them.
Thank you so much for sharing. I want to just read from the chat. One thing Judy Bella says is sleep deprivation is a major problem among too many students. And Laurel responded, I know we also see that with adults. I remember the night before my first teaching, I was like up till 2 a.m. trying to like perfect the lesson plan. It's like, really, what's going to impact this lesson plan? To like fine tuning or just like getting some sleep? Just before we move on to the next chapter, I love that Elena Aguilar is both big picture, but also gives really concrete strategy. So if you haven't read the book, she of course talks about sleep, nutrition, and exercise. She also talks about the importance of like sex and physical intimacy. She uses a term, forest bathing, I've never heard of before, but it's like being out in nature and the woods. And then really concrete strategy, spend time in the trees, sit near water. She mentions a flotation tank. I've never heard of that. Get in the sun, but without sunscreen on, like 15 minutes can give you your vitamin D. It is important. And even just being grounded, being barefoot on the earth. So I just thought fun mix of practical things. Anything else, Rudy?
Yeah, just a quick note, because I was glad to see that in this portion of the book, the kind of famous first year teaching roller coaster graph was used. And she kind of does a good job in organizing the book around the school calendar roughly. But of course, this was, pre-COVID. And so while the chapter talks about, what might be happening in terms of teachers feeling disillusioned in November, I think it's also important to realize that all of those things, all those typical things have been accelerated. And so, teachers have been in that state a lot earlier and a lot more intensely than in the past. And so I think that's important to kind of acknowledge and for leaders to really prioritize attending to that.
She also in this section mentions, she talks about perfectionism and martyrdom. I'm going to go ahead and pull that into the next chapter. So chapter 7 is called Focus on the Bright Spots. And I'm curious, for those who work with self-critical or perfectionist teachers, I'm curious, she talks in here about strength-based coaching. She talks about appreciative inquiry. How do you help these educators who are really tough on themselves to help reframe? Kendra, as someone who's coaching teachers every day, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, like a strategy that sticks out in my head is like, I don't let up when it's time. You know, we go through the pleasantries of like, how are you? How's it going? And then typically in the education profession, the next part of any agenda is like, let's talk about your glows and grows. And I will strategically keep the glow section really long and kind of daunting, because I want people to focus, and especially those teachers who typically operate under perfectionism, it's very quick to go to the negative parts of their teaching or their practice. And actually on page 178, Aguilar talks about how your brain, it's just completely natural for our brains to like go to the worst part first. But some of a coaching strategy I picked up actually from a professional coach that I was receiving was she would not let me stop with good things. So she would be like, and then what? And then what? And what else? And what else? I mean, it feels awkward at first, because honestly, how many times do we typically list so many great things that have occurred that we've done? And I kind of challenge them and ramp it up a bit by not letting them use like additional aids. So I used to have to look at my calendar to be able to reflect on good things I did. I know, really bad, right? But that's how like Outlook crazy I am and kind of was and still am. But the point is like making them sit in those celebratory moments and really claim them and think deeply about like what has transpired that has went well. Even the smallest things, like, you know, I made it to work on time. I opened up my laptop and logged on Zoom every day, you know, on time with my students. I made lunch for myself versus buying things. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to stay classroom specific. I think that's where we really push people who are perfectionists, think beyond just the typical tunnel vision teacher practice, and thinking, you know, more broadly about success.
Amazing. I just want to share one of the activities that or anecdotes that she starts this book with is an activity called the Secret Admirers activity, where with her young ones, they would pull a name out of a hat and they wouldn't share who they got, but they had to admire and watch and observe that person all day. And at the end of the day, they would sit in a circle and they'd reveal the person they'd been watching and share their appreciations. Like Oscar gave Manuel his soccer ball during recess, and Billy helped Tomas with math. And I just loved reading about it because the kids loved it and they wanted to do it every day and they wanted to do it all year. And Elena mentions that it works for kids and grownups too. So for anyone watching, for anyone on this panel, try to implement, I'm curious, the Secret Admirer for a day, for a meeting, it might be, or for a retreat, more likely, it would be really fun. Anybody else kind of want to share about coaching when it comes to, you know, overcoming someone else's narrative, overcoming the story in someone else's head? Laurel, let's go to you if that's okay.
Sure, yeah. So I think that the perfectionist in me resonated with a lot of the things that were in here, but also I've seen it in a lot of educators. And I realized that as an educator, I started teaching when I was very young, and really teaching was the first time I ever really truly failed at anything. And failed badly in a lot of ways. You know, I've been always that good student who had done well, and you knew kind of what the standards were for how to do well when you're a student, right? But when you're a teacher, the standard was reach every single student and make sure that they grow and learn tremendous amounts every single day, and make sure that all of your students are engaged all the time. And the expectation is tremendous, right? And so you're going to fail constantly every day. And so that's something that I remind my teachers as I train and coach them, is that like, you're gonna, you know, the expectations for what we're putting on you are kind of impossible. They're aspirational and they're kind of sacred in terms of what our goal is, to be able to reach every single student. I think that that's a beautiful goal to have, and an amazing one. And it's one that I never want to lose sight of, but it's also impossible at the same time every single day to meet every single one of their needs in every single way. And so being comfortable with that failure, I think, is something that if you are a perfectionist, you have to very quickly get used to, because teaching is a humbling profession in so many ways. And you are going to fail day in and day out. But I think that some of the tips that she has in terms of building up cultures that we can do in terms of the communities that we create are really great. And as you mentioned, the example that she gave of the secret admirer one is really wonderful. And one of the ones that we do at my current work is also, we have lots of gratitude practices. So I know gratitude is also another like buzzword catch thing that everyone's like, oh, if you were share like gratitude every day, you'll feel better. But it actually works, and we like to do it as a community as well as just individually telling what we're grateful for. So we'll share gratitude to each other, and we have this tree where students can just pick cards and just like write something that they're grateful to a teacher, a fellow student, staff member, and they put that on the card. And then we'll take certain points during our assemblies where we'll just pass out those cards to everyone and have that practice as well.
I love it. Thank you. I'm trying to work on this spotlight here. All right. I also just, again, for those who haven't read the book, just to share some best practices and frameworks. I love frameworks. One, we talked last week about emotions, acknowledging your emotions. Zachariah talked earlier today about acknowledging emotions and also the non-identification that you are not your emotions. She gives a framework for appreciative inquiry, which is define the topic that you'll be exploring, discover what already exists, dream what could be, design what should be, and then focus on deliver. How do we make it work? I thought that was a fun framework. And then she shared on dealing with strong emotions, her RAIN acronym on 186, which is recognize that you're experiencing something, accept whatever it is, acknowledge that it is what it is, and then investigate and kindly, like, in a detached way, ask yourself, I wonder what's going on in me. Where is this coming from? And then non-identification, which Zachariah has already modeled, which is remind yourself, you are not your emotions. You have the thought or feeling. You are not the thought or feeling. So I just wanted to shout that out. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to share about this chapter before we move on?
Jump in 1 second,
Please.
because in my work with new teachers, novice teachers, and also with students, I think, again, remembering the humanity of all of this is so important. I read the quote that Rudy put up from a teacher, and it just reminded me of the days when I taught you all as my students, and the pressure that you put on yourselves. And one of the best lessons I ever learned about teaching very, very early on, before I ever had my own classroom, I actually worked with 2-year-olds. And one of the things they would have to do is go to the trash after lunch and scrape their plate. And if they dropped food on the floor, it wasn't a big deal. They were 2 and we understood that. And once I started teaching, I realized, like, yeah, my kids are bigger than me, but they don't know how to do this. And so if they make a mistake, it's okay. And I sort of adopted that for any student that I work with, no matter the age, that, new teacher or 9th grader, that we're learning. And so in learning, there's a level of grace that has to be present. And I can't be, so frustrated, because if you knew how to do it, you wouldn't need me as your teacher. And so I think we have to afford that grace to ourselves as well. Like in any new endeavor, if you knew how to do it, you wouldn't be in this space. And so, there's always this pressure to get beyond, like, I want to be over there now, but if you were over there, then you wouldn't be here. And if this is where you are, then you need to honor this space and live in this space and take, whatever this space has to offer, and know that it's preparing you for over there. And so, I think that's a part of focusing on the bright spots. So it makes me, I'm sort of thinking, okay, whatever Kendra's telling her students now, I'm going to take a little credit for that, because I hope that in her formative years, when she sat in my class, that some of that she got, that, this is a process and it's okay. And I'm going to give you grace to grow. So I would implore everyone to, think about that, whatever your endeavor is, that I want to reach out to this teacher, whoever that comment was, Rudy, to say, just grace, give yourself grace, and give the people in your charge and in your space the same. And it will carry us a very long way.
I love that. Rudy, can you share the whole tweet, because it got cut off, if you have it fresh?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we'll do.
Oh, no, I mean, just sure you want to read it aloud.
Oh yeah, it says, never have I worked so hard and felt like such a failure. And that was 1 hour before our conversation this evening, and within that hour had 500 likes, folks that resonated with.
And then Kendra, do you want to elaborate on giving yourself grace?
Yeah, because, inevitably you're going to need it back, right? Like, you're going to either need to, you're going to have to extend it, and then you're going to need it, because nobody's perfect. Like, we might have perfectionist attitudes, but everyone is liable to fail at something at any part of the day. And to speak to like Anika's point, like when you create these spaces, you notice that, people breathe a little lighter, and you're able to sit and be present in the moment. I think about like her class, and not the Anika show, the Anika and Jackie JHU show. But when I think about my experience in her class in comparison to other lecturers or other facilitators, like she created that that culture where we knew that it was okay. And like, I felt like, dang, how can she be so calm when I literally just like rushed here, tried to get her it's raining, my grade homework, just taught all day. But like, to create space means that I was able to then see myself grow and then extend that to her point. Like, now that is one of my like core values when it comes to coaching. Like, they're not going to know all of these things. And so, yes, it did trickle down. Anika, you can take all the credit. I don't mind. I want to like you when I go.
I am just major snapping and agreeing to that. I think the give grace and the get grace transitions to the next chapter very nicely, though I will note she has a section here on sadness. She also has written in this book how much Pixar's Inside Out resonates for her, because she says this chapter is about seeing the bright spots, and she's like, we cannot see the bright spots if we cannot also see the bleak moments. And she tells a story of when she was mad at some injustice, and her husband said, just sit with not just your anger, which we often jump to, but that sadness. She notes that when anger is present, look carefully, because sadness often lurks below. And then she raises the question, what is it like, I wonder, to have a healthy relationship to sadness? I bring this up because a lot of the realities that we confront in the schools in which we serve, in the systems in which we operate, are systems of injustice that make us really sad and mad, and many emotions. I feel like I definitely cried in Anika's class, as did many of us in our first year. Curious if anyone wants to share about how they deal with their own sadness, or how you've helped people in a moment where they're just overwhelmed by their sadness in a work environment. I know this is a tough topic, so just throwing it out to see if anybody has anything to share.
I'll jump in quickly to say, I think to help people with their sadness, I have acknowledged that I've been sad myself. A lot of times when you're in that space, you feel alone. I mean, that's the scary part of it, is if you feel completely alone, and I'm the only one who's ever felt this way, I'm the only one who's ever gone through this, that's when the spiral starts. So sometimes it's just helpful for somebody out there to say, I've been there. And so I always, tell every teacher my first year story, that there was a day after teaching during my first year that I was living with my mom at the time. I just walked in the house. I said no words. I went upstairs. I turned out all the lights and I closed the door. And I just laid on the bed, and I'm pretty sure I cried, And I tell that story to people because this is 25 years later, and I'm still doing it, and I still love it. And it's like she says in here somewhere where her husband said to her, like, you won't always feel this way. And I think just to have that lifeboat thrown out to you, you won't always feel this way, is sometimes just all somebody needs. Even a kid, a grown up, because we all battle, in different ways with sadness. And it gets bad when you really convince yourself that it's just you. And so I think if we all recognize that, and just even say in passing to somebody, you know what, this too will pass. Like I've been there. I don't have to know your whole story, but I know that it'll pass. And I think that acknowledgement helps people start to see the light.
Go ahead.
I used to measure a week by how many times I cried that week. I mean, in my first term, I'd be like, I only cried 3 times this week. Like, what a win. But I love that. You are not alone. Zachariah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Rudy, I think it was you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Rudy.
I was going to say as well that one of the aspects I like of the organization of the book is that at the end of each chapter, including this one, there's kind of a target disposition. And in this case, it's empowerment. And so I think, again, one of the pieces that has us sometimes slide into that vicious cycle that Anika mentioned is that when that sadness, or I should say, when our madness or anger becomes sadness, is when we feel like we don't have any power to make a difference. And so I think helping others see, what action they can take, or helping them see that they are making a difference, is what gives that hope and keeps them motivated. Because I think that's an aspect of that isolation Anika mentioned, is that you get alone in your own thoughts and you're thinking that you're not making a difference when really you are. And so just being able to encourage each other and knowing that you are making a difference despite the challenges.
Thank you all. I love this conversation, Zachariah.
Yeah, I grew up in a household, and I'll acknowledge context. I grew up in a household that wasn't particularly. This is going to sound bad, and I don't mean it in a mean way. Like, wasn't particularly emotionally intelligent. I think having grown up in a different culture where my parents were both born and raised in Egypt, and then came to the U.S. As adults. I have an appreciation for the fact that there's a different setting and different rules. But one of the conditions that they showed up in my house is that, like, they weren't particularly communicative about hard things, about hard emotions. And not only that, I think my parents often inadvertently just took polar opposite approaches. My dad, who was a scrappy, hard-nosed immigrant, just like didn't have time for any emotions. And again, I can see again now with the benefit of hindsight, I can see instances in life in which that approach can actually be helpful. And then on the other side, I think my mom just didn't like focusing on anything negative, anything but the positive. And so she was really great at celebrating. She's a wonderful, and still is a wonderful, just like cheerleader in life. But I would say, like, I've developed a good amount of emotional intelligence in spite of that upbringing. And so I think one of the most important things that I think is should be kept in mind about sadness is to feel it. And I know that sounds very basic, but I believe it's important to feel the range of emotions. It's one of the things that makes us human, and it's one of the things that I think should be appreciated about being human. And I think anytime there's discomfort with an emotion, you're running up against a number of things potentially. It could be cultural values around expressing emotions. It could be your own experience or skill set. Expressing emotions, even something like language, to have language to express emotions can be challenging for some people. But I think the most important thing is to feel it and let it wash over you. I would add on to that, and also keep it from spiraling into something destructive. because there is a point at which, we do need help from others, close friends, family, professionals, outside professionals at times. So, but feeling it first and foremost, I think is something that would benefit a lot of us when it comes to sadness. And then the second thing that I was thinking of as other folks were talking, I guess I try to find the silver lining, perhaps to an annoying degree about things, but I just thought if one is sad, there's a gift in that, because it means that you have something worth caring about.
Mhm.
And I just think that there's something to be appreciated there, whether it is loss of a person, loss of a community, or an activity that is really special to you. Be that invested in something, and to feel an intense emotion like sadness, which again is often layered with other things, so sometimes it's hard to find it. It just means that there's something that's worth it to you, and I think that that should be celebrated alongside with the acknowledgement of any sadness you might feel.
I think that's so beautifully said. I love it. Okay, so related to allowing yourself to be sad, the final chapter is about compassion, which includes self-compassion and also compassion for others in general. How do we cultivate compassion? I want to note up front that Elena Aguilar starts with the definition of terms. So she says, pity is when you recognize someone's suffering, but from an emotional distance. It can be condescending and dehumanizing. Then there's sympathy, which means you care for someone, but still maintain some emotional distance. And then empathy is when you really place yourself in someone's shoes and feel their pain. And then she gets to compassion, which she says is when you are moved to take action to relieve someone else's suffering. She really notes that action is what distinguishes compassion from empathy, which I thought was just a helpful definition of terms up front. Okay, for this group, lots of places we can take this. One, there's sections about compassion for people, difficult people who frustrate us. There's talks about compassion fatigue. Who wants to start us off in this section?
I'll start us off. In my role as a coach, I often say tears are a symbol that we're about to have a break. So I like to honestly see the visible emotion of tears, and I frequently, when I see people emote in that way, I like to say, I see your tears. Can you tell me more about them? Because, I want to add the voice and provide the opportunity for explanation. But then that also gives me some leverage around how to move to the compassion part that Elena speaks about. Because, I don't want folks to wallow too long in the emotion of sadness, especially outside of the coaching experience. And I want to maintain that opportunity that there is an opportunity for resolve. And so compassion, I think, is one of my motivating factors behind coaching. It's not necessarily helping people to just emote, but then also helping them to feel empowered and able to problem solve beyond their emotions. So it's more like a practical compassion.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I think that compassion is also important when we're working with our students. And we've talked about this a little bit, how COVID, has how COVID has impacted everything. And, teaching and kids and this, the whole thing about cameras and understanding home situations as well. And sort of that fine line of, compassion, of understanding where they are, but then not rolling over into making excuses. Poor kids. We can be compassionate, but I think genuine compassion and that action piece moves you to challenge kids. Okay, maybe you can't turn on your camera, but if you can, why don't you? Or, maybe things are loud at home, but, when is a moment when we can talk, or we can email, or we can talk in the chat? And I think, one of the things she says on page 217 is the way we see the world is the way we experience the world. And so if we start making up these stories around our kids without really knowing, then that's how we're going to see them and pigeonhole them. And this, at the same way, if kids start sort of perceiving the world a certain way, then that's how they're going to approach their educational journey. And I think we as educators have to always be on guard for that and to push, how am I perceiving this? Am I creating this world that maybe isn't the case? And then the kids are just falling into it. And then asking the kids as well, like, well, how are you seeing this situation? Somebody introduced me to something called the mood meter. I don't know if you guys have ever used it, but I start my classes every Monday. We do a mood meter, and it's basically, how are you feeling today? And it has, for younger kids, it has smiley faces and all that stuff with words. And then there's another one with more not intricate, but higher level vocabulary words. And, I asked the kids to drop in the chat. So before I just automatically assume, everything's A-okay or everything's horrible, I'm asking them to sort of, you tell me, and then we're going to work from there. And then when somebody says something that's really, upsetting, I take the time to pull them to a breakout room and say, hey, you put hopeless in there. That means something to me, and then we go from there. So I think that, being willing to take that action is super important, especially and also, when you're working with your students, not just, adults.
I couldn't agree more. Anybody want to add to that? High expectations while still showing compassion?
Yeah, I think we were talking a little bit before getting started about how that resonates as well with what Del referred to as the warm demander. So making sure that you are demonstrating warmth and compassion to your students, but also in so manifesting that and having demands for high expectations, knowing that they need high expectations and that they'll rise to the occasion and rise to your expectations so that they can have the life trajectory that to fulfill their potential.
I also want to share a little bit, again, just in sharing best practices from the book. She shares 10 concrete steps for how to deal with difficult people, how to practice and cultivate this compassion. I'm going to read them quickly. 1, listen to their complaints, but without comment. Be very careful about feeding their negativity. That resonated with me. 2, get hooked into their storylines. She's like, imagine you're watching stormy weather, which relates to 3, get curious about what's going on for them. You could just be curious. I wonder why they're so heated about this. Step 4, don't take their behavior personally. It is never about you. I find that one hard to implement. Step 5, cultivate awareness of common ground. It's there somewhere. I love that sentence. It's there somewhere. If you can find some common value, some piece of connection, even if it's just the Baltimore Ravens, even if it's, I don't know, you got to find something. 6, remind yourself that people can change. I think that's super fair. Don't hold a fixed mindset about other people, much less yourself. 7, say this to yourself. Just like me, this person has suffered. Just like me, this person wants to belong. Just like me, this person wants to be happy. I love thinking about that, like common humanity. Step 8, stay clear about your own values. Let go, try to let go of your anger. Be the person you want to be. Stay true to your own values. Don't let them drag you down. Step 9, give yourself permission to step away, detach, draw boundaries, know who brings you into a toxic place and try to avoid them. And then 10, of course, you can always ask for help in dealing with the person. Anybody else want to add that relate to them? Otherwise, we'll start closing up.
I heard a quote when I first started coaching from one of my coordinators. It was, you can't coach someone if you think they suck. So I think this kind of plays into the difficult people list. And that's when you ask for help, right? Like that's when you lean on other supports and you have to be really honest and reflective with yourself because we all are trying to achieve the same thing. We all want to be seen. We all want to be in a comfortable space. But yeah, that stuck out to me. Like I would add that as number 11. You can't coach someone you think that sucks.
Super inspiring. Well, we're in our last minute, so I'd love to pass it off to Zachariah. I'd love for you to share a favorite quote from this section that resonated with you. I'll leave it on the big grid, though, so we can see everyone's reaction.
Sure. So this is from our last section, Cultivating Compassion, on page 212. And things throughout this book have stood out for me for one reason or another. This one stood out to me just because I think I needed it. I needed to hear it. I needed to process it. I think I still need to work on it. Just remembering that in past work environments that I've been in, most of the time it's been great, and there have been a couple of things here and there that I have found recently I'm still hanging on to, and I don't want to hang on to that stuff anymore. I want to be able to process it and grow from it and let it go ultimately. And so, page 212, it's a passage from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, but it's MPHO. I'm going to guess info. It says this: forgiveness is the only way to heal ourselves and to be free of the past. Without forgiveness, we remain tethered to the person who harmed us. We are bound to the chains of bitterness, tied together, trapped. Until we can forgive the person who harmed us, that person will hold the keys to our happiness. That person will be our jailer. When we forgive, we take back control of our own fate and our own feelings. We become our own liberator.
Snaps, everybody. Thank you, Zachariah, for reading that so poignantly, for explaining its significance. Everybody, we will see you next week, this same time, as we finish this incredible book that even this conversation, this book, it's brought up a lot for me personally as well as professionally. So thank you, panel. It's a joy to get to talk to you.